Well, today's our second look at Darwin, and we've been squarely rooted in the beginning, right? At the card table. That the material from that book is the stuff we've been looking at so far. This is a continuation of that look, and it's really there. Today we sprinkled in a little bit of gambling themed things that still have a real good magic flavor to them. So they're still like entertaining pieces, and it's not just about boring dealing and that sort of thing. There's actual like real hard hitting effects. So really for me it was just pick that fits in with all, I think most of us here in the club have this point of view of just trying to find good strong commercial magic, and I think that this is a good showing of Darwin's good strong commercial magic. I think we're going to get a good taste of it today. So
absolutely wonderful. Let's fire it up.
Yeah, this first one is a little bit of a game, but you're going to see that it comes around at the end and it becomes just a wonderful piece of magic. So let's fire up this first one.
My name is Darwin Ortiz, and for the next few minutes, I'd like to show you why you should never play cards with strangers. To begin with, I thought I'd show you what happened the last time I played poker. I'm going to need the 4 aces. The reason I need the aces is that, as you may know, it's a common practice among many card sharks to secretly stack the 4 aces when they play poker. And frankly, I've been known to do the same thing myself. Now, if you want to deal yourself a hand like 4 aces, the first thing you have to accomplish is to secretly control the 4 aces to the top of the deck. Now, I can't show you the way that I secretly control the aces to the top of the deck because it's a secret, so you just have to believe me. But I'll show you what happened once I had the aces on top. I was introduced to a new game, new to me at any rate. They called it Greek poker. And in Greek poker, the deck's initially handled in 2 halves. Half the deck, well, we don't need the joker for this. Half the deck goes face up, half the deck goes face down. And you actually shuffle the face-up cards and the face-down cards together. The game's a variation of stud poker in the sense that in any stud game, you're dealt some whole cards, some up cards. In Greek poker, you just don't know how many of each you're going to get. Now, it was my turn to deal, so I gave the deck a couple of shuffles before I dealt, and I figured that it would help to know what the other players in the game had. So, I gave them nothing but face-up cards. I didn't want them to know what I had. So, I gave myself nothing but face-down cards. I wanted to know what they might get on the draw, so I made sure the rest of the cards were also face-up. Of course, I wanted to win, so I didn't deal the other players anything of value. But I did deal myself 4 aces. Now, it's not really that difficult to deal yourself aces in a poker game. It's not that difficult if you cheat like I do. See, I use a marked deck. I don't know if you can see the marks on the backs of these cards. Can you tell that these backs look a little bit different from these backs over here? Thank you.
Pretty great. It's pretty great, right?
Wonderful plot. So we're talking about the drunken poker plot, everybody?
Greek poker. I think drunken poker's a different guy, but yes.
Yeah, but the drunken poker's the plot, right? It's the plot is that you've got, as I recall, the face-up cards, face-down cards, and now when you deal, they're all face down to you. So that's kind of this spooky effect instead of just triumph, right? So you're leveraging the face-down cards. So you get a great triumph display. Then you get this wonderful thing where you just have your cards being the only ones that are secret and everything else writes itself and all the effects that come with it. And Darwin's, of course, big shake on it is that all the cards change color, which is pretty cool.
Pretty startling, right? That's very unexpected, especially because throughout that whole thing, you feel like you're seeing face up, face down. You feel like you're getting a whole view of the whole deck, but it's a beautiful ruse. What a wonderful thing.
It's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful trick. The recently departed Paul Cummins has a wonderful version of it that club members we may attack in the upcoming show, which is, I think, one of the easiest ones. And I don't frankly think, I think Darwin added some stuff there to make it. Darwin, as you all know, be aware, Darwin Ortiz is, made his whole living from being a John Scarney type, from being a professional card cheat type, Martin Nash type show, where I'm going to do a trick for you. I'm going to do a demonstration of how you deal from the bottom. And then it sort of gets magical from there, but you can frame it like it's some kind of poker or security lecture. And that was always a thing ever since John Scarney used to do it way back in the way back. Demo act, they used to call it. And Darwin is probably the most renowned character from his time period for doing that kind of thing, and led to a whole slew of guys like Jason England and Andrew Wimhurst and a lot of guys that were came up after that who really took after what Darwin was doing, although they may have claimed other idols at different times and all this kind of stuff. But Darwin was really important in that realm. And so one of the things about Darwin is he's one of the best constructors of magic you're ever going to see. He's really very good at structure and presentation and putting it all together. But it's also not, I don't think, aesthetically very key to Darwin that the audience never perceives he does a sleight. I think because of the kind of show he's doing, he wants the audience to perceive that he has some skill, and that lets him make some choices that you might not necessarily make unless you were doing that kind of show. And I think that trick is a good example of that, because that's a really pretty easy thing to do, that trick. And I think Darwin probably put some stuff in it to keep it interesting for himself and to have it look like he was really doing some poker stuff. Would you say that's fair, Alex?
Yeah, and it seems like he's dancing on both sides of that line, right? He's dancing on like squarely right down the middle of all of his presentations. There's this whole theme of him being like a gambling expert, but he steps to one side and all of a sudden he's a magic guy looking at gambling stuff. And he steps on the other side and he's like even more hardcore gambler going, it's not this magic stuff, the sleight of hand stuff. And he dances back and forth, making it so that he's like opening up a curtain and almost like giving you a little bit more inside information. It's like he's breaking the fourth wall a little bit here and there, just so that you like get a little wink and a nod from him. And it's like, oh, he's on our side. He's trying to help us. And then boom, magic happens, you know? It's very interesting. It's a very interesting sort of character choice. And I've been examining it and thinking about it since I've been in magic, because it's so interesting. Because, you know, who would choose to be like the scoundrel that is like the gambler like that? But he finds these ways of lightening it and making it so that he's really, really likable. And then he'll go back to being a scoundrel. And, you know, it's just an interesting dichotomy. It's an interesting way to play that whole notion and be a guy who's doing a show. You know, it's just a very interesting thing. Like as a character in a movie, that would be one thing, but like he's a guy in a show and he's like your ambassador for the evening, and he's on both sides of that line. It's just fascinating to me. Always been fascinating.
And it helps Darwin that he really just isn't a scoundrel on any level. He's just a nice guy. He's not a particularly loud guy. He's not a particularly boisterous guy. He's kind of a gentle guy, if
There's
you mean
no
it.
doubt. Yeah.
And so he's pretty serious, but his gentility comes across, and the fact that he literally wouldn't hurt a fly comes across. And I think that makes a lot of that stuff play better than it might if he seemed like he was genuinely a what makes Sammy run kind of guy on the make, which he's not. So
because he's going to a softer spot, and then when he goes to that spot, it almost appears tongue-in-cheek because he is such a gentle guy. And when he goes to that scoundrel-like place, it's almost like he's putting it on, right? So it's a nice little balance, but interesting nonetheless.
When you think of John Scarney, when you think of Martin Nash, sort of the gold standard in this area, Martin Nash was the charming cheat. You know what I mean? And he had a twinkle in his eye, a twinkle in his teeth, and a twinkle in his pinky ring. And they would go bing, 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 you know, and there was just a certain energy to that. And Darwin is such a magician. I mean, I don't know if he would approve or appreciate that, but I certainly mean it as a compliment. But I think at the end of the day, Darwin is doing magic shows. And so when the turn happens, there's always a big kind of wink, because he's like, and it's magic is the subtext. You know what I mean? And so and it's magic. Everyone's like, it's magic. No one's not really checking their wallet. Right. Because when you're with a shyster in anything, whether he's a mind reader or he's selling you home improvements, when you're with a shyster, you get the feeling that you need to be watching out. And when you get to the end of Darwin's tricks, you get the feeling that, it's a magic show. It's like nothing could be further than what's happening.
That's right. Because at the end of every one of these pieces, you see him beaming that beautiful smile, and you're like, he's with us. It's really cool. It's very interesting because there's not anybody that I can think of that's really playing it as hard as Darwin does, especially in the beginning of his career. There are moments where he seems almost like confrontational in some of the earlier performances of him. You know, some of the stuff we saw in the last one of the Afternoon Astonishments we did, there were some moments where it almost seemed like he's just a little bit condescending, you know. And I think through the years he's been able to soften that up and make it really just he's more likable than he's ever been. And I think it's just he's just better at his craft, and he's just constantly improving, and it shows, you know.
Yeah, it's, you know, it really is just part of like the continuum of maturation as a sleight of hand artist. I think when people first get very skilled at sleight of hand or believe they're very skilled at it, there tends to be a little bit of a rough edge around that a little bit. And then we're very blessed that there tends to be a softening over time as life does what it does. And as people begin to realize, well, this isn't really the cure for cancer, they become much more pleasant about it. And that sleight of hand stuff, it only really plays well if after you did all that work, that you have a sense of humor about it. I mean, it's a little bit like if a person does themselves up all day and they're stunning, you know, and you say, hey, person, you're beautiful. Wow. And they say, yeah, I worked on this 8 hours today. I better be beautiful. That's not the answer. The answer is this. I just threw this together. Let's go. And I think magic plays the same way. Like the longer you worked on it, in order for it to be amazing, you have to really be okay with no one really perceiving how long you worked on it. Because really, what are they supposed to do with that?
That's right.
You know, I'm sorry. I mean, thank you. You know, let's watch another trick. What are we going to do?
Yeah, you know, speaking of working on a trick, this is one that we've spent some time, you and I have spent some time working on this and looking at this. And it's just, you know, it's one of those pieces that's really fun. The modern jazz aces. Let's look at this next clip.
I like this trick. This is a lovely little
trick. It's a great piece of magic. Totally.
But in a moment, I'm going to do something for you which I will perform not once and not merely twice, but throwing all caution to the wind. I'm going to do this for you 3 times.
See him throw that caution to the wind?
A little miracle with 8 cards. And only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards. Now, the important cards are the top 4 cards, which consist of the ace of diamonds, the ace of clubs, the ace of hearts, and the leader ace of spades, which will go face up, while the other 3 aces go out in a face-down row. Now, I'm going to try to make all 4 aces gather invisibly into one packet. I just use these 4 cards to help it happen. So if you remember that we employ 4 black cards, one of which goes over here, should be no confusion. I'll bury an ace among the remaining black cards, and I'm going to try to make the cards change places. Now, if I did that correctly, it should leave me with 4 black cards, and 1 ace has traveled across. I'll do it for you again. It's all right. I'm going to do it for you. Remember I said I'd do it 3 times, so we'll do it again. This time, the black card goes over here, and the ace goes over here. Now, if I did that correctly, and I usually do, it should leave me with 1, 2, 3, 4 black cards, 1 ace traveled across. You have one last chance now. You know by now the black card always goes over here. You know the ace always goes over here. You know I'm always left with 4 black cards and 4 aces.
What a lovely trick.
It's great. That's a great piece of magic, man. I love it.
It's the perfect example of a trick that doesn't need to have a kicker or 3 kicker endings. In the last couple days, we've seen some tricks that had 3 kicker endings. It's the old, here's the trick, now here's the big surprise, now here's the big surprise. You know, and that stacks up. And sometimes it's like, think about the cups and balls, Alex, right? When you do the cups and balls, sometimes you do a 1 cup routine. It's like lemon, big surprise.
Yep.
And sometimes I've seen you after a good long delay, you're like, second lemon, unexpected lemon. So that's like, you could almost say that the first lemon is a kicker or a big finish, one surprise, the one everyone's entitled to, in a big surprise finish. And then the second one is like the max,
That's
right? It's like, and you could keep doing it, right? You could literally have a lemon appear under that cup every 30 seconds for the rest of the show. But you get to a diminishing returns, or at a certain point, with a lot of these tricks, confusion. If
That's
the
right.
deck is a
That's
color,
exactly right.
one card changes and the deck changes, now the deck changes back. Now it's like after you sort of do a surprise on the surprise, you've maxed it out.
That's right. Now you're going backwards after that. Totally.
And this is the perfect example of how you can actually just do a trick that gets cleaner. It's an effective repetition, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we have a big kicker ending, it turns into an effective surprise. But in this beautiful construction, it's about repetition, and it just resolves itself. Just as you get to the last one, you think, let me see what's happening there. And of course, there's nothing to see, and the effect's over.
Right. All questions have been answered right when that final laydown happens. There's no path to go back to. It is over. It's really good. And one of the wonderful things about modern jazz aces, it sure is practice. That's just a great trick to just work on. I love it so much. It's just fun.
I would say that a lot of Darwin's magic had that going for it when I was growing up. I love to practice it. I loved doing Jumpin' Gemini. I put a trick in my book was based on Jumpin' Gemini called The Omen because it was just so much fun to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another trick that's fun to practice. It's just pleasing to practice. And audiences like it. I mean, I think it's important just to say that in this hyper stimuli laden world, right? It's important to know that plenty of good magic doesn't have to have a kicker ending to actually just be wonderful. And in fact, you can only, like, you could say, I'm going to do 20 minutes of magic and every single trick is going to have 2 kicker endings. You could do that. And I think you wouldn't be alone if you did that, but I think you would be wrong.
That's right.
That's
right. You do that stuff too much, it loses its impact. It loses any sense of reason, right? Because if it's just happening all the time, it becomes what's expected, and now you sort of broke the magic dynamic. You know, that's one of the things about magic is it's surprise, mystery are coming, and if they it's sort of being telegraphed, or they sort of sense what's coming next, it's like you broke it. You know, you broke the whole mystery.
It's like Magician in Trouble. When I was 16, I turned around one day and I found out that before the ending of every trick I did, I made a mistake or got into trouble or got it wrong. And I would get it wrong and people would go, wah, 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 but something tells me.
Right? I have a feeling you're going to fix it, man. You're going to use your magic, aren't you?
I would love to teach it in our favorite tricks. For those of you watching on the web, at CC Club, we have a regular member workshop we do called Our Favorite Tricks, where 3 of us teach something that we've been working on lately. And I practiced this in anticipation of teaching it in Our Favorite Tricks for a few weeks, and we just didn't get around to it. It's so much fun because, you know, it's got an Elmsley count in it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A couple of those.
The Elmsley count is such a beautiful sleight for practicing. I've got this belief that the Elmsley count is one of the handful, really only a handful of sleights that are designed to be perfectly natural and beautiful. Most of them just aren't, you know, most sleight of hand depends on a lot of stuff to make it deceptive. And in a lot of cases, the very design of a sleight only allows it to be about 90% perfect, and the rest of the illusion is created by other things. But the Elmsley count is sort of one of these perfect teachable sleights where if you practice that one, as it gets cleaner, everything gets cleaner. And the rest of the trick is really actually pretty easy to do, right?
That's right. That's right. It's all the handling that you saw, right? It's pretty much the sequence of things that happen. So it just ends up being fun because you're pretty much the story that the spectators are seeing. That's what you're going through, and it feels very magical because it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. It's really, really good. I love it.
I'm going to answer James's question real quick, and this is something that we talk about in a 3M coaching program. A little hint for those of you paying attention, we're thinking very seriously that there may be a 3M session, which we didn't get to do last fall, in the coming couple months. So for those of you who are looking to do a reboot in the club or to have an opportunity to take this special course that we traditionally do once a year, we haven't done it in over a year because we were doing the CC Club Deck last fall. But one of the things that we talk about in that is James just asked, most sleights, he's assuming he's talking about sleights, are trying to simulate natural moves while allowing sneaky stuff to happen. And I would say that with card magic, we broke it roughly into 3 categories. As we remember, there are, and yes, they're all trying to simulate not doing them, not doing anything sneaky, but some of them are trying to simulate a normal thing that you do. So for example, we might turn a card over in life, and there might be sleights that we can do that appear to be just that. Then there are sleights that we do which simulate kind of made up actions, right? So sometimes we'll do cuts and stuff. We can build a sleight into that, and sure, it was a cut, but was that really a natural action? It was one of those natural actions that was kind of invented because it allows you to do sneaky stuff. And then we had the third category, which is those sleights that actually don't actually simulate any normal movement. There's nothing happening at all. It just happens as though the deck was literally just still and nothing was happening to it at all, right? So yeah, technically you could say it's simulating the natural action of raising the deck to the fingertips, but really it's as though nothing at all happened. So that's the answer as far as I know. At least with card magic, right? At least with card magic. We could do it with coin magic too, but that would be 2 days in a row, and I just don't think we could bear it. Alex, what's Darwin going to show us?
Now we're going to get into another classic of magic. I don't want to say it because we should get the surprise. This next one is great. I think it's a really great version of this particular plot. And those of you that are familiar with the plot, you'll see right away. You'll know exactly what's happening here. But really great. Let's check out this next clip.
You know, I go through over 500 decks of cards a year between practicing and performing.
Oi.
And when
Plot
you
cards.
open that many new decks of cards, every so often you'll find a misprinted card. Now, I brought these 4 cards along because they're all misprinted in exactly the same way. You see, they all have backs on this side over here, but they also have backs on this side over here. Now, although they don't have any faces, fortunately, they are marked on the back, so you can still tell them apart by reading the marks. But they're only marked on one side. See, for example, this one's marked on this side, but it's not marked on this side. This one's marked on this side, not on this side, just on this side over here. Each card is marked on one side only. Now, you may not be able to see the marks because they are very tiny. It takes trained eyes. I can make it a little easier for you by enlarging the marks. For example, this one is the 5 of clubs. Yes, the 5 of clubs. I can see it because it's not marked on this side. It's just marked on this side. If I enlarge it, you can see it a little bit more easily. Would you hold out your hand for me? That's great. I'm going to ask you to hold on to the transformed ones for me, okay? And Corrine, would you feel that card? Tell me, does that feel like an ordinary card? Like an ordinary card. And it is, except that it's marked on one side. It's the, oh, here it is. It's the 5 of hearts. See, it's not marked on this side. It's just marked on this side. If I enlarge, it becomes a little easier to see. So that leaves us with 2 to go. Why don't you feel this one and tell me if that feels like an ordinary card? And it does, because it is, except that it's marked on one side. It's the 5 of spades. Not marked on this side. It's marked on this side. Becomes a little easier to see when you enlarge it. You can relax your hand for a moment now. We only have 1 more to go, keep in mind. I'm going to ask you, I'll ask Leanne to feel this one and tell me if that feels like an ordinary card. And it is, except that it's marked on one side. That's why if I tap like this, I'm sorry, it's on the other side. It's a 5 of diamonds. If I tap right here, it will. I think we're going to have to try something a little bit different. Can I ask you to hold out your hand one last time? And remember that we have only one last one to go. I'm going to ask you to hold on to that 5 of diamonds. Put your hand on top of it also, like trap it completely between your hands. That's it. That's perfect. Usually, if I tap like that, I don't know. Take a look at the card. Show it to everyone.
Oh my God.
You know, you have probably never owned marked cards, so I'm going to give these cards to you as a little souvenir. And if anybody brings up the subject of marked cards in a card game, you can go, I've got some, I'll show them to you. Here you go.
See, there's a man with a sense of humor. He knows that never comes up. But now we're into one of those age-old things. That's an all-backs routine. That is not a trick that most people who've done a lot of card tricks have a neutral point of view about.
That's right. That's right. I must admit that I have switched my point of view on that trick. I remember when I first got into Magic, I really did not care for that plot. I always thought it was just, it was something weird that I couldn't put my finger on. But I knew I didn't like it. That's all I knew, is I didn't like it. But the older I get, the more I'm into the effect. And I love this version of it because it's not like, most of the time when you see this, it's like a whole deck, right? It's a misprinted deck. And I like the notion that Darwin has. I go through a lot of cards because I'm a card expert. There's a lot of cards around. Every once in a while, you bump into some of these weird cards that are misprinted at the factory. I've collected a handful of them because I go through 500 decks a year. It's pretty plausible. And it's just a handful of cards that he goes through the whole thing with. I think it's, you know, again, it's a commercial piece because it's all really believable and you go on the ride with them because all those elements are, they're just believable enough, right? I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, you know.
Was Aaron's face.
What can I say? It really all depends on the version. I feel like, you know, it's a pretty tough thing when you're sharing. I don't think it tips people off to the fact that there's gaffes. I think it's really hard to do. What was the old line Jim Leach used to say? Every move a move. So I think when you're setting up a trick so that every single move is a move, you're dealing with an awful high rate of a low ratio of effect to method, right? You're essentially doing 1 or 2 or more sleights for every single magical moment that the people experience. And so whenever you get yourself into a ratio like that, you're kind of already dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight. And while you're doing that, you're asking the audience to look at this odd object, which is only being made odd because of your literally constant sleight of hand. So when you compare that to something like card warp, which Alex just did just a couple weeks ago, you know, you're looking at an impossible situation, and Alex doesn't have to do any moves or sleight of hand to maintain that illusion for 20, 30 seconds at a time. You know what I mean? And so this thing is requiring an awful lot of processing power and an awful lot of sleight of hand related stress in order to do stuff where at the end of the day, you know, those cards are being handled real intently.
So what you're saying is you're not a fan of the all backs routine because all of them sort of have that thing going on with them, don't they?
Some more than others. I think when we go ahead and we take a look at some of the OG methods that are a little bit softer, I think they don't have to be. I just think that this particular handling looks a lot sort of like Dingle era New York card magic, what you and I used to call snap, crackle, pop. And I think it's not, regardless of the fact that it's not my favorite plot, I'm simply sharing that it's a hairy thing to get into if you want to set a standard for your magic that the audience doesn't think, wow, his fingers, his sleight of hand, wow, that's magic. I think it's a tough standard for this effect. That's all. David asked a question in here that was, what is the ideal effect to method ratio? I think Vernon was pretty good at shooting for, in his best cases, one or more, often more effects for a single secret move. And I think anytime you can be outpacing it and getting 2 effects, moments of magic for every one secret thing you do, I think that's when I start to smile and feel like the ratio is working for me. As a sleight of hand artist, I practiced for 10, 15 years, but didn't realize the gains I wanted until I started removing unnecessary opportunities to do those moves. And so I found ways not to do them so I could be doing them less often. Because I find that sleight of hand works better when it's in a ratio where you're not constantly going from sleight to sleight to sleight to sleight, which is one of those things about heavy duty coin magic we were talking about that makes it such a different beast.
That's right. That's right. Because it's often, that is the case with coin magic, right? There's a lot of work that needs to be done to make those beautiful illusions occur. And it's not easy, and often takes years to get a coin piece feet to where you feel like it's really doing its,
But when we talk about expansion of texture, which we talked about last night, which Alex has taught in for members, check it out. We have got a whole training on it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about tricks there where it's at least 2 effects. It's one sleight, one big effect, and then often you get a bonus, right? So you're not doing an awful lot of moves, and you're getting more in return for your efforts, which is just really great. Otherwise, you start to feel like you're on the run all the time from the audience. One of the things about being a criminal, I would assume, is that it's unpleasant if you set up your criminality so that you have to be breaking the law every minute after the initial crime. It doesn't stop, right? You don't get to just break the law, go home, and never sin again. You have to break the law 80 times on your way home to keep them off your trail. And so that's what happens, I think, when you end up with a heavy sleight to effect ratio. And I don't know if this is weird, Alex, but that kind of thing affects how much I like an effect itself.
Sure.
Like,
I understand that.
I tend to like effects if they come at the right price, sleight-wise. It's part of it, right? Because when you look at a trick, you're thinking not only will the audience love it, you're thinking, how's it going to treat me? I'm the one that's got to marry it.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like when I look at new effects, I'm looking at it in stages, because that's one of the stages that I'll come back and look at. Is, do I love the method as much as I love the effect? Do I feel like I'm getting, what I need out of this? Do I want to put in the effort? But it's, it's like several looks at the same thing. Like it takes me a while to say, I'm going to do that trick, because I have to circle around a few times,
And for years,
I'm making the right choice.
you've been circling around. Like Alex has just told us that he's found a place in his heart for the all backs routine. But it sounds like that took about 25 years before he was willing to entertain the idea that he might like it. So in some ways, I think for us long-termers, some of these things are exercises in learning how to be open as much as anything else. Like, I'm not sure there was anything wrong with how Alex felt in the first place. It's just, one of the things you like to do to keep yourself amused is see if you can open yourself up to things that you weren't open to.
That's right.
See the good in them and stuff like that. And sometimes in our age range, that's reason enough for doing virtually anything.
It's true.
I'm doing it because I never thought I would, isn't this a trip?
Yeah, my mind is opened up to new ideas and new ways of being. Let's embrace it and let's see how far it goes.
Which is one reason that you should take all the salt you need with this advice. We don't feel like you're supposed to follow these ideas blindly, but test them in your own reality and probe and ask if you want to know more, because at the end of the day, believe me, we really don't say as much as we might. We could talk more. I know it seems unlikely,
It's true.
Let's do one more.
Yeah, let's do one more. This one is, I saved the best for the last. This is a real showpiece. And after you watch this, you guys might entertain taking on this version of this plot. Really a wonderful showpiece. And I think this really showcases everything we really love about Darwin. This is great.
I want to try something, and I'll give you this deck of cards as a souvenir when I finish this. But I want to try something that's a little unusual, a departure from the sleight of hand demonstrations that we were doing before. Try something that actually has nothing to do with sleight of hand, just getting rid of the jokers and the advertising cards and so on. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had an experience that you thought might be clairvoyant, or that's the only explanation you can think of it, could explain it?
Yes.
So have I, frankly. I've had a couple, mainly in card games, which is a very good place to have those kinds of experiences. And it's made me want to experiment further on the subject with cards, because I find that when I succeed, it's usually with cards. I realize as I do this, some of you may want to look at this merely as a good card trick, and that's perfectly all right with me. All that I ask is that you watch carefully enough so that after I'm finished, you can ask yourself whether it could possibly have been done in any other way except through a transmission of thought, if we're successful. Because it's not sleight of hand, I can't guarantee the results. Let's start by pointing out a couple of obvious things. Notice, first of all, the cards are all facing the same way. That's important because in a moment I'm going to ask you to turn a card facing the other way. Also notice that if you cut the deck of cards, the top card's going to change. That's obvious, but I just want to stress it because in a moment I'm going to ask you to cut. A little less obvious is the back card changes too. Anytime you cut, top card changes, back card changes. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to hold the cards under the table and cut like this. In other words, you take a pile off the top, put them on the bottom. Keep in mind she can cut near the top, she can cut near the middle, she can cut near the bottom. That's up to you. In fact, even before you put them under the table, why don't you try it once? Just take some off the top, put them on the bottom. Yep, that's exactly what I want you to do under the table. Hold them under the table so I can't see this time what top or bottom card you get. Cut near the middle, near the top, near the bottom, that's up to you. But basically do the same thing that you did a moment ago, okay?
I can do that.
Let me know when you've done it.
I'm done.
Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to take either the top card of the deck or the bottom card of the deck. I don't care which one. Take either the top or the bottom card of the deck, turn it face down, and stick it in the middle of the deck. Would you do that right now? Just take the top or bottom card, turn it face down, and stick it in the middle.
Got it.
And square them up real neat,
Okay.
so there's no card sticking out. Can I have the deck? What you did just now, I did a couple of hours ago when I was getting dressed and getting ready for the show. I took a deck of cards. I just held it behind my back. I didn't hold it under the table. And I cut the cards, and I took the bottom card. I don't know if you took top or bottom, but I took the bottom card, turned it over, and stuck it in the middle of the deck. And I haven't looked myself. I couldn't tell you what card I ended up turning over, but I know that there is a card in here that here we go. And obviously, I could have cut nearer the top or nearer the bottom and arrived at a different card. That's the one that I arrived at, so that's the one that we will place aside. Now, I did that a couple of hours ago. Jean did the same thing a couple of moments ago, reversing a card. Not quite the middle, but it's okay. She put it more or less in the middle of the deck. Now, when you did this a couple of moments ago, the card that you reversed was the 3 of spades. When I did it a couple of hours ago, the card that I reversed was spades.
It's pretty great. It's pretty great.
And let me just ask you a silly question. How many sleights were there in that puppy relative to the all backs routine?
Well, there's definitely some work that's happening there.
A lot less. Like it just secret moves per square minute. It's like a lot less.
Remember, he started with the sealed deck.
Well,
that doesn't knock your ratio.
well, I don't think you have to count that. Remember, Darwin's doing an instructional video, and he loves to do too much.
Fair enough.
He does. Hey, you know what? It's either Pharaoh or it's not Pharaoh. I say it's either unpharaoh or Pharaoh. Super Pharaoh and the farmer and the dairy-o. Well, if you're going to count that, that's astonishing. But all right, fair enough. I'm just expressing that in this instance, we have Darwin making the best argument ever, right, for why the all backs routine is less productive to the magic quotient of the overall performance. That's all. It's just such a strong, beautiful thing. And it's not about so much with the cards.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how else to describe that.
It's totally true. I mean, when you're doing an off routine, it's about showing those backs, and you have to do all those shows. And those are all, every single one of those shows are going to be a slight heavy thing to do that thing, right? And when you're looking at the effect that we just saw, bam, bam, they're both face down. It's the card. That was always my complaint with the all backs routine, is I have all this other material and that doesn't match up to what these other effects are. It's just not as strong of an effect. And all backs always just, to me, just felt like an interlude or something that was just a neat thing that you could share with people. But you know, I still have an open spot in my heart for it because I've warmed up to the effect. But when you see an effect like this, like I wouldn't even put it next to it because this thing is stellar. Like that is pretty close to real mind reading, right? Or at the very least, a manufactured coincidence that cannot be explained, right? I mean, it's really, the effect there is so stellar that I wouldn't put all backs next to that.
Yeah, it's an entirely different caliber of an effect, you know? And the problem is that as a sleight of hand artist, there's a cumulative effect, and the effect is created in some cases before they hear of you, before they meet you, before they see you. Mm-hmm. And you got to be real careful. And certainly a card magician, if you're a one sector magician, you got to be unusually careful because, you know, how you know, if you do the mental photography deck, which is a trick where you've got a blank deck of cards and then you snap your fingers and the cards start printing on them, and they print on the backs and the fronts. And in a way, it's not so different than all backs, frankly. It's about printing things that shouldn't be on the cards and then unprinting them. You're sort of throwing a poison pill in the water that takes something like this and makes it sort of deleverages this trick before you ever get to it. Now, I'm not saying for a minute that Darwin necessarily had these things built in a show that way. We all know that this is an instructional performance built to set up an instructional set of explanations and stuff. But for your own thinking, right? You can like or not like all backs, and you can do it or not do it, but God help you. If you've got a miracle like this coming up, you've got to know that you are subverting yourself big time by doing a trick like all backs as you're heading towards something that's meant to be legitimately hands-off impossible.
Yeah.
And this is an expert at the card table, right? Expert at that's the name of the book.
At the card table. This is in my opinion, this is one of the real showpieces from that book. Like this is one of the reasons to get that book, right? And it's got that thing that some of the guys were alluding to, that whole thing about the pharaohs that we were talking about. That's a pretty big secret that Darwin discovered and gave out to the world, and it's described in the context of this effect. And it's, like I said, I think it's a great reason to get that book among many others. You know, just with the material we've seen today and in the last Afternoon Astonishment, you can see that's, you know, it's a pretty wonderful book in terms of the commercial effects that are there in the book. Pretty great.